back to another quick edit here on Free Will Photos. Today we're going to try and recreate this photo of the Mandalorian minifigure. I'm not a Star Wars like crazy fan. I appreciate it and decided to make something that looks cinematic and out of a film or out of the film. So let's just go ahead and dive right into it. So here we are with the raw photo. And we're just going to go ahead and get started with a base edit. So the first thing that I want to do is hit AI match because I did like what I was getting on the back of the camera. So let's see if we can mimic that again. Knowing that I want to go dark with this scene, this kind of does help out. The next thing I'm going to do is hit the camera profile, and I went with landscape on the original image, so we'll go with that again. And you can see this is already getting that base vibe, if you will. Now, obviously, some things are getting darker than they need to be. I'm okay with the foreground being dark because that actually drives us in to seeing the minifigure here. And then this bright area will situate a little bit later. So the next step is I have to correct this depth of field issue. If you look at the plant here and the plant here, they're also in focus. And there's so many ways that you can fix this. The way that I'm going to fix this today is hitting the add filter and throwing in a lens blur. Now the lens blur, in my opinion, is probably one of the most underutilized tools inside of ON1. I really do like it. It'll be great if we get a depth map that we can put in here, or a gradient map. That would be great, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and hit the letter M to get my masking bug, and then I'm going to click on reflected gradient. I'm going to click right on the Mandalorian or the character here. And the beauty of using the reflected gradient is that I can independently choose where I want these blurs to kind of fade in, fade out. So what I'm going to do is come down. His foot can be kind of in blur, if that's the way that we want to say that. But what I'm really trying to do is fix what was going on here at the top. So if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see I'm really starting to pull that blur in over here. So when I pull this down, you can see I'm starting to pull this back, and I can manage how this feathers off. So if I need it to be a little bit more of a gradual feather from absolutely no effect happening in between this solid line and this solid line, and then the effect starts to blur itself gradually until it gets to this dotted line, which at that point it's reaching that 100%. So anything after this is getting 100% of whatever effect that I put over here. So if I crank this up, you can see how that really starts to modify that. I'm not going to over edit with the blur because I think that this works out pretty good. There are some areas where I would like more blur. So what I'm going to do is just pull this down, and it's okay if parts of his helmet are in the blur range or the blur field. I think that'll be okay. But you want to make this look somewhat realistic, and this is working for me. For the most part, I need some detail over here because he's looking over there. So there should be something that makes sense to what he's looking at. We don't quite know what he's looking at. I didn't do a good job with the full story of this particular image, but that's okay. All right. So the next step is to open up the shadows on the Mandalorian so we can bring back some of that detail. There's two ways you could do this, but I'm just going to stay inside of my layer stack here for effects. Effect stack. And I'm just going to use a tone enhancer. Now, all I did here was pull up on the shadows and exposure just a bit. And you can see I'm starting to get that detail back on the Mandalorian. So then all I have to do is hit the invert. I'm going to hit the letter B on my keyboard. And then I'm just going to paint in the details using the brush tool here. And these details they don't have to be like, I'm not looking to overexpose him. All I'm trying to do is bring out some of the detail that's on him. Now his visor, I do want to expose that just a touch. And the reason I'm going to overall darken this image, I know where I'm going with this. So I want to darken, or I'm sorry, expose that just a little bit. So now that we, are pretty far along, let's just see where we came from. This is the starting image, and here we are with the result that we have so far. Now this looks great, and we could absolutely work with it from here, but let's go a little bit further. So the next step is to really take these greens and make them look otherworldly. Now you could do this with a LUT, which I may actually do this time around. If I go brown, yeah, I might do this, and we'll saturate it. No, it's not going to come out the way that I want. But essentially you could use a LUT, and then you just paint the effect away from the Mandalorian and everywhere else that you don't want this effect to go. In fact, you know what? Let's see if the AI will work for us. So I'm going to go ahead and reset. We're going to come over here. Let's see. So flora, natural ground, sky, architecture, apply. Let's see what happens. Invert. So it could work. That's not the look that I want to go for though. So what I'm going to do is add a filter, click on color enhancer, and we're going to go ahead and click on the yellow channel, or select the yellow channel. I'm going to pull up the range. I want to push these towards the green side here, and I'm going to desaturate them a little bit. Now, I know I said I want to get rid of the greens, but what I'm trying to do is make these yellows as even toned as possible with the greens. So when I actually go to the green channel, it'll work. So I'm also going to pull down on the brightness of the yellows here. And I'm going to pull up on my range, and I'm going to pull my greens to the hue of yellow. And then I'm also going to desaturate that, and we're going to mess around with the brightness here. And I'm still getting some colors in there. So what I want to do is grab my picker tool, come on one of these areas, and it's still in the greens, so I'm not sure why it's giving me such a hard time. Maybe pull, and this is all about trial and error here, because what you would think would work, there we go, it was in the aquas, which, who would have guessed that? And so we'll do something like that, maybe. And the goal here is just to make this look otherworldly, right? I do have an end state of what I'm going for, but the idea is to kind of make this look like a different planet, because, it's Star Wars, so obviously it should look like it's on a different planet. So I'm going to pull down on the saturation there, and we're going to go ahead and grab our brush tool. And again, I'm just going to paint this away from the Mandalorian, because I don't want him to be impacted by the color shifts. I want his armor and helmet and everything to be unaffected by this entire change. So we're just going to paint all of that away, and we'll turn this effect off and on. And we're starting to get the basis of really changing the atmosphere. So let's keep going in changing the atmosphere in this particular shot. So the next thing that we're going to add is a grunge filter. We're going to go ahead and click on grunge, and I want to pull up on the brightness, because I don't want this scene to get overly dark, right? I do want it to be a little dark, but not overly dark. And then I'm going to pull up on the amount to really like grunge it up and make it look like it's otherworldly. All right. Maybe even add in just a touch of detail. And what I'm going to do, because I don't want the Mandalorian to be too intense with this, I am going to paint it away from him in areas, so that way I know that it's not going to impact him at all right now. And then I'm going to come over to my mask, and this is where the density slider really shines. I know I talked about this in the past, but essentially I want the grunge effect to happen just a little bit on the Mandalorian. And instead of adding multiple, like another grunge layer, all I have to do is pull back on the density. And what it's going to do is, and I got the wrong mask view here. So what's happening right now is the effect is not showing through on the black areas. Well, as you pull down on the density only applies to the areas that you have masked out. So the areas where I wasn't applying the effect. Now it's starting to gradually, like very small amounts, apply that effect and fade it in. So that way it looks a little bit more realistic. This really does take the photo to, or give you flexibility. Will you be able to really tell the difference? I'm not entirely sure. You let me know in the comment section below. But at 70% and then at no percent, you can see it's a very subtle shift. But it's a shift nonetheless. I don't need the Mandalorian to get all of this grunge effect. I just need him to get a little bit of it, so that way it ties him in with the rest of the image. All right. So we'll go ahead and close our mask there. And I'm not going to touch saturation, or I think I cranked up the detail slider just a little bit, but your photo is going to require more or less of this effect just based off of your own subjective flow. Okay, so now it's time to actually add a cinematic LUT. So we're going to come right back over here to our LUTs, and we're going to hit the drop down, and I am going to go to cinematic LUTs. Now, this is a LUT pack that I have. You can put whatever LUT you want. You can create your own color grade. And I think that this particular LUT looks great, but you know, I'm going to sample just a few here, see if we can find something that was very similar to what we already had. And some of these don't look as good on the overall image, but the goal here is really just to sell the fact that the reason this plant looks the way it looks is because he's on a you know, weird planet that people go to in Star Wars. I don't know. I'm not a huge Star Wars fan. I just know enough about it. Yeah. Anyway, I think I like the first one, and you know, like I always do, I never recreate the image that I showed at the beginning, because I'll be in a creative flow and then I make decisions. Now, what I do know with the LUT is that I use the color blend mode. And the reason why I'm using the color blend mode is because I really want to force that color into everything without messing with the contrast of my overall image. So if I go back to normal, you can see that it gets darker and the contrast is really being impacted. All I really want from the LUT is the color. So if I hit color, the contrast comes back, and now I can kind of just blend that in with my scene to make it match with what I want it to match. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know in the comment section below if it doesn't. All right. So now that we have the LUT in place, let's go ahead and take a look at the before and after. So here is the before image and here is the after. Now this all by itself is its own amazing look, and we could stop here, but we're going to keep going. So the next step is adding in some grain. When you do film or, you know, like movie aesthetics, adding in grain is, in my opinion, very, very important. Now, when you add it into your layer stack is completely up to you. In this tutorial, I'm going to add it above my LUT. I know that some people would say you should probably add it underneath your LUT, so that way your film grain receives the same color treatment as your LUT, and that helps tie it all together. I'm not overly concerned about doing that, so what I'm going to do is choose a film. I usually go with like Kodak 400. That's the black and white. So I'll just go with the Ilford Super 400. And all I'm going to do is crank up on the size of this so that way it is fairly visible, the grain. The amount doesn't really matter. I think 70 is probably pretty good. So turning it off and on, it's very subtle. It probably won't even show up on YouTube. Let me see if I can zoom in to make it visible. So if you look on this leaf here, you can see there's some grain happening there. And even in this highlight area right here, if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can kind of see the grain popping up there. It really does add some conceptual idea and atmosphere to the overall shot, because the next things that we're about to do is add in some more of those atmospheric looks to really hone in on this image. Now, I'm about to step away from the script just a little bit here to see if something works. I'm going to go ahead and hit add and come to weather. I'm going to throw some fog in here. So let's go texture, or I'm sorry, that's actually down here at the bottom. Fog amount, we'll scroll that up. And I want the fog to come in from the bottom, right? So bottom half, and we could do bottom half slow. This, again, I always never remake the photo the way that I made it originally. We could play around with the distance. So now I'm just pulling it down to get the fog somewhere where I want it. Let's pull up on the amount, and I think that looks pretty good. What I would, caution, if you will, is it doesn't have any like volume to it. So you may have to really build this in using brushes. And if that's something you're interested in seeing, I can figure out a way of doing it and then creating a tutorial. Let me know in the comment section below if you want to see how to build in this fog and weather effect. But the way I'm going to do this, in fact, I'm going to leave this here because I think that this is going to help with the overall selling of the image. But the other thing that I may want to do is we're going to add another weather filter here. We're going to crank up the fog, and I'm going to put the distance. And this one is really just for that background. And maybe even crank it up a little bit more. And let's make the transition happen a little bit more. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is just paint this out where the Mandalorian is. So we'll do that. Yeah. Like I said, I never remake the same image. Let's paint it back over him, just a little bit over the top of his helmet. And I'm using a brush with a high feather, so it just fades in a little bit more. And again, I'm going to use that density trick because he would be coming through the fog. Or in fact, what I'm going to do, so another way that you can really start to build up your effects is by using your opacity on your brush. So right now, the effect isn't happening anywhere on the Mandalorian. If I hit the letter O, you can see I have all black over the Mandalorian. So what I'm going to do is lower the opacity here, and I'm going to build this effect up over him. So I'm going to start at a opacity of 20, and I'm just going to start clicking, and the areas that are further down, I'm okay with building those up. And then what I'm going to do is click and bring this down just a little bit more. And now I'm going to paint over the top here. And this is just bringing back some of that atmosphere. So it looks like he's really interacting with the fog or the mist. Now, this one is a little heavy, so I'm going to pull this opacity down because I still want some depth in the background. And I think that's looking pretty good. Now, what I need to do is really just add more contextual reference to the image. And the way that I'm going to do that is by adding in an overlay. So I'm going to hit the plus icon here and go to my extras folder. And then I'm going to click on the backgrounds. I'm going to go, did I click the wrong extras folder? My extras, not ON1 extras. There we go. And now we'll grab an overlay. So the one that I used in the original photo was mist number 3. So I'm just going to go ahead and add that as a layer. And because it has a black background, all I need to do is change the blend mode to screen. And this is going to allow me to really add that. I'm going to hit the letter V on my keyboard so I can reposition this. And what I enjoyed about the last image is that there was like this mystical approach to the overall photo. So, and I think these mist or fog elements really help drive that idea, like there's some mystery. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop this one right here. I'm going to lower the opacity and I just resized it to make it make sense for the overall image. And in fact, that might be covering too much of the bottom portion of the plant there. So I'm just going to pull that back and we'll let that ride. All right. So this is without the mist overlay and this is with the mist overlay. So now what I think I need to do is put some thicker mist behind the Mandalorian. So I'm just going to add another layer and I think I'll go with this mist number 2. And I just got an idea that maybe I will add in some smoke. I didn't add that in the first one, but you know, that's the fun with playing with these overlays. So what I'm going to do is just drag this out all the way across the image and make this like a backdrop for him. So let me hit Command minus so I can zoom out. And then I'm just going to drag this across here, maybe do something like that, and maybe even pull that up. I'm literally just playing. Like I said, I did not do this the last time. I'm just messing around with it now to see what I can do. So we're going to zoom back in. Oh, too far. There we go. All right. So obviously I don't want this over the Mandalorian. So what I need to do is click on the layer mask here, and you guessed it, I'm going to go with a paint out. I'm going to pull the opacity back up, but not all the way, actually I will pull it up all the way, and I'll just use the density trick to save time. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this from the Mandalorian's helmet, the areas where I want the detail to kind of shine through, right? Which would be that visor area. And I'll come back and clean this up a little bit more here in a second. And then I think I will lower my opacity and just paint away from the chest area, because I wanted to make it appear as though he's walking through the smoke. We went through all that effort to really build him up as interacting with this environment. So I think it would just be really wise to keep that same energy. And I'm just trying to clean up this mask here a little bit, probably getting more fine-tuned for a tutorial than I probably should, but if you bear with me, we'll get through it. Yeah, probably need to take some more off the front of his visor here. That might work. I'm gonna pull down the opacity of this layer so it really blends with the environment, which then is starting to make that look a little bit odd. We'll probably pull it away from here just a touch more. So now I think we're getting somewhere. I think it's starting to get a little too misty. So what I may have to do is come back to our original image and pull down on both of those mist layers. And you know, this is the beauty of working non-destructively. I can come back and really start to hone in what I think looks the best for the overall image. This one may be the one that's a little too much. Yeah, that's looking a little bit better. Okay, so now we have some mist we have grain. Let's take a look at where we came from. So this is the before, and this is after all of the modifications we did to the original photo, which looks great. And now we're really starting to add in some elements to make this photo go one step further, in my personal opinion. Again, this is all subjective, but it's my photo, so I get to do what I want, right? On your photo, you'll be able to do what you want as well. Okay, so now that we have our mist layers, it's time to add in a lens flare. I just thought that that would have been, or was cool. So those are located in my Atmos 4 folder. And the lens flare that I used was this one the last time, but I think I'm going to go with this one this time. You know, I like to change it up sometimes. So same idea here. Hit the screen blend mode, get the letter V for my move tool. And the idea with this is that there was something behind him that was a light source, and it caused this lens flare. And it's really just a visual interest. Does the photo really need it? Would it make more sense for me to put the lens flare over here? Maybe. I don't know. But then it would just be in a weird spot. So I went ahead and made it as if something was kind of reflecting off of the back of his helmet. It's not realistic. It's not true at all, but it is what I felt like doing with the photo. So all I have to do now is grab my masking brush, make my brush size relatively the same size as the curvature of his head, and I'm just going to click a bunch of times because I forgot to change my opacity. So now that was a little too much, so I'm going to bring my opacity all the way back up and then paint that in. And it's okay if it goes over his head or his helmet. The real goal is that there's just some visual interest. It doesn't have to be there, like I said. I just decided to put it there. So now that I have the lens flare, the next thing is adding in the little flare over his blaster. So I'm going to use one of these smaller flares. In fact, I think I did use that one for his blaster. So let's just go with this one. That way we don't have like repeat flares. Whenever you're using overlays and elements, try to change it up or at least reshape them, so that way they don't end up looking repetitive in your image. I've seen that a lot in the past where it's like, man, you really reused that effect in this image. And it just doesn't look very realistic or, in my opinion, good. But, you know, who am I? I'm just a dude that makes videos on YouTube. So I went ahead and resized that, positioned it over his blaster. And what I think needs to happen is maybe rotating this a touch, maybe like so. I'm not entirely sure. In fact, you know what? I am going to do something again that I didn't do in the original one, but you know, that's just the way I work sometimes. I'm going to duplicate this layer. The way that you could duplicate it is you can click on it and you can click this duplicate layer button, or you could just right click on the layer. And now that I have this layer duplicated, I like the effect that that's giving off. That's not the reason why I duplicated it, by the way. So I'm going to duplicate this again, and probably 2 more times, just because I really like the way that that buildup is happening there. And you know what? I'm going to delete this one. And what I'm going to do with the other layer is rotate this so that way I get like this, this crossbar. And I'll probably make this one a little bit smaller on the inside here. This is just how you play around with photography. And then I'll duplicate that to make it match the same intensity level. And I like what's happening here. So I'm gonna roll with that. Okay. So now I think I have all of the elements that I want in the overall image. What you want to do, or at least what I do, is I right click on the topmost layer and I hit new stamped layer. Everything that has these little bubbles circled in, that means it's going to become part of the new layer, of this new stamp layer, which then allows me to edit the image completely as one big image as opposed to individual things. So it's not destructive. Think of this as the stamp layer in Photoshop where you're just combining everything. So if I turn off all of these layers, then I would be able to see that one. And I'm going to rename this stamped layer just so that way I know what I have available to me in my layer stack. And what I want to do with this stamped layer is a few different things. First, I want to do the crop to 16:9. So if I hit the letter C on my keyboard, it'll transition me to the crop tool. And I'm already in the 16:9 ratio because I did this on the other image. And I'm just going to pull it in a touch and put the Mandalorian on the left third, just like so. And maybe even pull that out just a little bit. Hit apply. This in itself is also non-destructive, but it's going to give me that aspect ratio that I'm looking for a film. Now, you could make your aspect ratio whatever you want, and you'll be fine. If you want to go 8:10 or 16:9, whatever it is. I just like this particular look. So now what more needs to happen? I think there's a few different things that can happen. In the last image, or the image that I created, you'll notice that there was a letterbox on there. Well, I created that by adding a color fill layer, which we haven't talked about much on this channel. But essentially what the color fill layer does is it fills the layer with a color. If I hit the letter M and I click once with my reflected gradient, it is going to show underneath, it's going to cut a hole in that black fill layer. And now I have the ability to really develop this gradient however I so choose. So I'm just going to pull this up to the top. And this isn't like perfect letterboxing, because usually letterboxing is a very harsh straight line. So this is more creative idea, if you will, by me. But I enjoy doing it this way, or at least that's the way that I felt like doing it. And I think it adds a little bit of dynamic to the shot. It really like focuses you in. Letterboxes are what a vignette would be to a photo, in my opinion. But the last thing that I'll do that I didn't do to the other image is I think that there should be a glow on the ground here. So we'll see how this comes out. I'm going to hit the local tab on the stamped layer, and I'm going to go to paint with color once this analyzes. We're going to do a paint with color, and I am going to sample a color that's over here. And with my brush, I'm just going to go ahead and start painting into this area. It's not going to look very good, but I feel like there should be some form of a glow happening in that area. We'll bring down the opacity and we'll play with our blend modes just to see. We'll go here and I wonder, so lighten and screen kind of look good. That looks more like a flashlight. I wonder what color does. Color could work. I may need to change the blend mode, or I'm sorry, the paint mode to maybe classic. So that way I have the ability to mess around with some of these other features, or tools, I should say. So let's see about brightening that area. Wonder if throwing some saturation in there can potentially warm it up just a little bit. And we're still in color, so maybe what does normal do? Yeah, it doesn't look the greatest. But you know, I think it does add something to the area there. And what we could probably do is I will paint away by making the brush a little bit smaller. I'll paint away at the edges here, or, oh, wrong paint mode. And maybe I do need to paint that back in. Yeah, we'll do something like that. I think that, you know, it just adds a little bit more character to the overall image. And now that I'm looking at this, I think that this is way too bright and it takes away from the star of the photo. So what I'm going to do is add in another adjustment layer. And this one is just going to be a quick little circular tool here, radial gradient. That's what I was looking for, the word I was looking for. And we will rotate this around. Sorry, my computer's starting to slow down a little bit. And we'll put this right over our star here. And then what I'm going to do is just fade this out a little bit. And I think that draws the attention back to the Mandalorian. It gives still contextual reference to the side of the image that he's looking into. So there's the final cinematic look. I think I did a pretty decent job with building a scene around this minifigure for something I shot in my backyard. So hopefully you found value in hearing some of the things that I was thinking through, and the explanations that I gave made sense. If you got questions, leave them in the comment section below. If you're looking to pick up ON1 Photo Raw, consider using the discount code FreeWillPhotos20 whenever you check out over on the ON1 website. You get to save some money. I get a small commission. It's a win-win for everyone. If you got questions about ON1 Photo Raw or just photo editing in general, leave me a comment down below, or you can reach me over on my website. Until the next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.